We hear the phrase national power tossed around every single day in the news. But what does it actually mean? I mean, is it just the raw size of an army, the vastness of a national treasury? Or is there something deeper, a sort of intricate machine working beneath the surface? Today, we are cracking open the anatomy of a superpower to see how the gears of global dominance actually turn. Let's dive right into this explainer and uncover what truly makes a nation powerful on the world stage. To figure this out, we're going to break it down piece by piece. We'll start with the illusion of the nation, check out the geographic foundations, dive into resources and industry, track the evolution of military tech, weigh the power of population, and finally, try to solve the puzzle of national character. Let's get to it. Starting off with Part 1, the illusion of the nation. We have to start with a pretty provocative realization. A nation isn't an actual empirical thing you can physically touch. You can't put a nation in a test tube or weigh it on a scale. So why do we care so passionately about it? Well, it's because power, at its core, is strictly about human influence. It's the power of man over the minds and actions of other men. A nation is really just an abstraction of the people within it. When we casually say the United States did this or Russia did that, we're actually just talking about the specific policy actions of individuals who are representing that massive collective. And that brings us to a fascinating psychological quirk known as vicarious satisfaction. Think about it. Society rightfully restricts our own individual drives for power. Most of us don't wield massive, unchecked influence in our everyday jobs, right? So everyday citizens who might feel frustrated or insecure in their own lives end up experiencing power by identifying with their nation's strength. You project your own unsatisfied aspirations right onto the international scene. When your country wins, you feel the sheer exhilaration of winning, and it kind of compensates for your own personal limitations. Which brings us to Part 2, geography, the stable foundation. Because once a nation decides to actually exert its collective power, it immediately collides with the physical earth itself. When we evaluate real power, we absolutely have to separate the permanent realities of geography from the incredibly dynamic elements of human civilization. Stuff like technology, factory output, and demographics, those are constantly shifting. But the oceans, mountain ranges, the sheer, staggering size of a continent, those are incredibly stable, unyielding factors that will outlast absolutely any single regime. Geography is literally the chassis of the national power engine. It provides permanent advantages or vulnerabilities that every single foreign policy has to account for. Just look at historical geographic shields. The United States is sitting behind a 3,000-mile oceanic moat separating it from Europe and Asia. That is a permanent defensive asset. Great Britain survived Napoleon and Hitler largely because of the English Channel. Italy leans on the formidable Alps guarding its northern border, and the sprawling, massive landmass of the Soviet Union has literally swallowed and exhausted invading armies for centuries. You can't just build these assets. You just have to be incredibly lucky enough to live on them. All right, moving on to Part 3, resources and the industrial engine. But a chassis isn't going anywhere without fuel, right? And what counts as premium fuel completely shifts depending on the technology of the era. Back in the 19th century, if you were self-sufficient in coal and iron, you essentially ruled the world, which is exactly what Great Britain did. But jump forward to the 20th century, the mechanization of modern warfare meant oil suddenly became king, shifting immense strategic power over to the US, the Soviet Union, and the Middle East. And then, everything flipped again when the atomic age dawned, making uranium the ultimate geopolitical prize. Suddenly, controlling uranium deposits elevated the potential power of entirely new regions. The moment we figured out how to release atomic energy from a uranium atom, the actual and potential hierarchy of nations changed practically overnight. Nations with access to uranium skyrocketed in power calculations, while those without it fell behind, no matter how much coal or iron they were sitting on. But here's the catch. Resources alone do not equal power. Take this staggering statistic. In 1939, only about 1% of India's massive population of roughly 400 million people was employed in industry. India possessed vast, incredible reserves of coal and billions of tons of iron ore, but proving that abundant raw materials mean absolutely nothing without the industrial engine to process them, they just couldn't be classified as a first-rate power at that time. So we can build a pretty clear framework here. Geography is the chassis. Resources are the fuel. Industrial capacity is the engine, and population is what drives it. Take Belgium, for example. They controlled immense high-grade uranium reserves down in their colony in the Congo. But because they didn't have an industrial plant nearby to process that ore into usable energy or weapons, and because it was so far away geographically, it really didn't increase Belgium's actual national power on the global stage. The fuel was absolutely there, but the engine was missing. Let's shift gears to part 4, the evolution of military tech. All that industrial capacity directly feeds into a nation's military preparedness, which historically goes through incredibly rapid, paradigm-shifting changes. Technological innovations in warfare repeatedly crush established powers who fail to adapt fast enough. Feudal lords hiding in castles, completely made obsolete by infantry carrying firearms. World War I saw the submarine completely upend traditional naval blockades. World War II introduced the devastating combo of tanks and air forces, completely overwhelming static defenses like the Maginot Line with unprecedented speed. And post-World War II, the atomic bomb provided an overwhelming, terrifying technological advantage. Ultimately, power belongs to whoever adapts first. Next up, part 5, the power of population. You literally cannot run a modern military and industrial complex without massive amounts of human labor, from the factory floors all the way to the front lines. Now, while a huge population doesn't automatically make you a superpower, like we saw with early 20th century India, no country can remain a first-rate power without a large, growing workforce. It is practically impossible to sustain the mass production and mass armies needed for modern warfare without it. This is exactly why leaders absolutely panic over declining growth rates. It's a huge, glaring warning sign for their future global standing. Because shifting demographic trends directly correlate to where the balance of power is going to lean in the future. Nations don't just look at their own populations, they are constantly comparing their growth against their competitors. A significant drop in a nation's manpower, assuming everything else stays the same, spells a direct, undeniable decline in national power. And age distribution is huge, too. A nation packed with citizens in their maximum productive years, like 20 to 40, holds a massive, massive edge over a nation where the older demographics predominate. And finally, part 6, the puzzle of national character. This brings us to probably the most elusive human factor of all, national character. We're talking about the deep intellectual and moral qualities of a people that, surprisingly, persist over centuries and drastically shape how a nation wields its power. There's this amusing historical anecdote from Otto von Bismarck that perfectly captures the persistence of these traits. He was visiting St. Petersburg and found a fully armed sentry guarding a completely empty patch of grass. Why? Well, it turns out decades earlier, Empress Catherine the Great had ordered a guard to protect a single blooming snowdrop flower right in that spot. The flower died, the sentry changed, but the order was never revoked, so the guards just kept standing there. It perfectly demonstrates a deep-seated cultural adherence to authority that influences how that specific nation operates, organizes, and fights. Whether it's American inventiveness, British common sense, or German discipline, these underlying traits are literally the ghost in the machine of national power. So as we wrap up this explainer, consider this. Power is an incredibly delicate, multi-layered engine. A nation might have the booming population but completely lack the industry. They might have all the resources in the world but lack the geographic borders to actually defend them. So as we watch the global landscape constantly shifting today, we always have to ask, which critical piece might be quietly failing inside today's global titans? Thanks for hanging out and exploring the anatomy of power with me. Keep analyzing the world around you, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.